Welcome to this week's expert interview, and I'm delighted to have with me today the legend that is Will Farnell. Hello, Will.
Hello, Rob. How are you doing this fine
Fantastic.
afternoon?
Fantastic. And Will, give us in 60 seconds the journey that's got to you to where you are.
60 seconds, that's a challenge. I left college, set up a record shop, managed bands, had a time in my life, made absolutely no money, loved being self-employed, decided that I wanted to be a management consultant. One of the ways to do that was to qualify as an accountant. So I did that and joined PricewaterhouseCoopers, as it was back then, where I worked as an efficiency and process improvement consultant. But during the time that I was qualifying, a friend of mine and I said, when we qualify, we'll get practicing certificates and we'll set up an accounting firm. And I did that in about 2007, left PwC and set up Farnell Clarke. And I had the advantage of not having trained in practice. So I had no preconceptions about how to run an accounting firm. Which meant that I set my firm up from a client perspective. I put myself in the shoes of the client and said, if I'm buying accountancy services, what are the things that are important to me? And that influenced the way that I positioned the business, the way we spoke, the tone, the service delivery methodology. And I had a fairly big vision that I wanted to change the way professional services were delivered and perceived by users of those professional services. And I've probably used 60 seconds already, and I've only just created Farnell Clarke. But if it's okay, I'll just do the last little bit. And technology was a big thing in 2007. And I thought there's got to be a better way. And through various investigation and research, we became probably the first 100% cloud practice globally back in 2009. Technology's been fundamental to our growth alongside the way that we've delivered services, and it's led us to being a firm of about 65 people now. We've delivered 30% year-on-year revenue growth for 14 years. And I'm in the fortunate position now that I get to spend a lot of my time mentoring, helping other accountancy firms make sense of digital transformation to enable them to grow, deliver better experiences for their clients. And that's me and what I do and what I love.
Yes, we'll give you a little bit more time, but it's a wonderful story. You wrote the book, The Digital Firm. What prompted you to write it?
So I wrote the book in 2018, Rob. We launched it at Accountex in May 2018. There was only one other Accountex since I launched that book, bizarrely, with the COVID pandemic and everything else. But I learned a huge amount growing my firm in terms of what worked, what didn't work with technology, and I did a lot of the things I did because I wanted to make a difference to the clients that we served. And I got to the point where I felt that with the clients that we were looking after as a firm, we were doing right by those clients. And it was almost, how can I now help other accountancy firms help their clients in the way that we were able to help our clients by utilizing technology effectively in our business. And we learned lots of lessons. I got far more wrong than I got right. And I didn't want other accounting firms to have to go through the pain that I went through growing Farnell Clarke. So the idea of the digital firm was almost to be a blueprint for firms that were about to undertake what we'd been through as a business. And I'm delighted that it was so well received by the profession. We have software vendors that still to this day give their new starters a copy of the book to say, this is what you need to know about the market that we serve. So really, really good. It opened lots of doors for me to spread the word, and I got to speak on stages and webinars and I love that stuff. So it was a good opportunity.
So what is a digital firm, Will? Is there a proper definition? Because I guess if I asked 100 accountants, I'd get 101 different answers.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that because I wrote the book, I my definition is the definitive one.
Obviously.
And effectively, I've got to see if I can remember this now off the top of my head. Normally, it's on a slide. But for me, a digital firm is a practice that utilizes the perfect mix of technology and people to deliver first class services to clients effectively and efficiently through maximum levels of automation. And we can almost break that down into a couple of key areas. Firstly, that it's not just about technology. It's no good having the best technology if you've got people that won't use it, can't use it, don't want to use it. So point one in that definition is it's a blend of people and technology. One without the other doesn't work. And the second really important bit is that delivering first class services to clients, because that's what we're about. How do we use that blend of people and technology to do better by the clients that we serve? And if we get those things working, we're naturally going to have automation, which will instinctively drive efficiency and effectiveness. So that's the way I kind of break that definition down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you speak all over the world, albeit virtually or in person. Do you get a sense that the UK is ahead of the game with digitalization of accounting firms, or do we fall short in some areas?
I think we still have to kind of tip our hats to the guys in Australia and New Zealand
Okay.
that seem to be at an adoption level much higher. Certainly a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, a couple of well-versed sources suggested to me that Australia particularly is at about 50% adoption of cloud accounting technology. My long-held view in the UK is that we're at about 20%, and I've been quoting that number for at least 3 years now, and I don't think it's any different. So I think what the reality of that is that 3 years ago I was being too generous in terms of that level of adoption. But where it gets really interesting is when we drill right down into that 20%, what we see is that there's probably only 20% of the 20% that are anywhere near cracking it. In terms of what I would refer to as a true digital firm. There's lots of firms that are playing at being cloud accountants, but that's the wrong play. So they're aiming for the wrong target. The right target is being at least a digital firm, or what I'm talking about now in terms of where I want to be with my firm, and that's what I'm calling the human firm.
That does make sense. And you mentioned Australia, you mentioned the UK. Where are the North Americans in that?
I think they're just because of the scale of the market. I think that they're probably a couple of years behind where the UK are, certainly in terms of adoption. But I think it's a very different market. We play very different roles as accountants in the UK as CPAs do in
How do you mean?
the US. Well, for a start, that everything is tax focused, largely in the US is my understanding. Whereas in the UK, even the smallest limited companies have got to file statutory limited company accounts and corporation tax returns and personal tax returns. Whereas a lot of the work of the CPAs that I've engaged with in the US is it's very kind of tax focused. And what we're seeing is we're seeing the CAS firms in the US, who are the ones that are doing the online bookkeeping. They're the ones that are moving into financial advisory much more than perhaps some of the traditional CPA firms. But it's not a market that I profess to be an expert on in any way, but certainly the conversations I have with some of the leading firms, certainly CAS firms in the US, is that they're a bit behind where the UK market is.
And what's driving the adoption of digital and cloud technology in accounting firms?
I think it's a variety of different things. Certainly, if we go back kind of 5 years ago, it was largely clients. So it would be those kind of tech savvy millennial business owners that saw a better way of doing things and almost went to the accountants and said, hey, I've seen this Xero, I've seen this QuickBooks thing, and actually we'd like to use that. Can we do that? And the accountants would say, oh yeah, of course you can. And then they'd go off and do the research and say, what's this Xero thing? I think now we're seeing competition is going to drive some of the adoption. The fact that you can't, if you're running an accounting firm, you can't not recognize what other firms like us and some of our peers are doing in terms of the way we're transforming the way we deliver services, the services that it enables us to deliver for clients, and most importantly, what I think is kind of the greater level experience that we deliver for clients based on what we can do by being much closer to the client, much closer to the data, the ability to have live accounting data that can drive conversations that we have with clients. And then, of course, there's the government agendas that keep getting delayed, but they're there nonetheless. That's driving a rhetoric of digital change, digital transformation.
Yeah. What will happen to the firms that drag their feet on digitalization or digitization, will, whatever we call it? What's going to happen to them?
I think that the challenge is that most people, and particularly accountants, are generally not positive about change. And that there almost has to be a catalyst. And we saw that very much with COVID. All of a sudden, things that would have taken firms 5-10 years to do, they were able to do in a matter of weeks, because there was a major catalyst that created enough threat, fear, drive, whatever term we want to use, to get people to step out of what they would normally do and think differently about what they do and how they do it. So I think there has to be that big catalyst. And frustratingly for me, HMRC pushing back MTD again, while I understand the rationale and the logic behind it, it just creates another opportunity for firms to say, oh, we don't have to worry about that for another 12 months. Or, look, we told you it was never going to happen. And actually, we shouldn't be changing because HMRC tell us we have to change. We should be changing because it makes a positive impact on the lives of our clients, with us having the ability to do far more than we can when people are not utilizing technology effectively. So I think that until everyone feels the pain, there will always be that section of firms that will not change. So it will either be regulatory, it will be fear, it will be threat, and ultimately, when enough people are doing it, competition. But if we're only at 20% adoption, then the majority is still in the camp that isn't doing it. So the competitive pressures are not going to be strong enough yet to drive that change. And I've just spoken on an M&A event, and succession is a really big issue. So succession might be the thing that drives it, because millennials, particularly, let's think about millennials because they're kind of the 40-year-olds in the workplace now. Attitudes are different. And whereas my generation, I'm a wannabe millennial and not quite a millennial, and certainly a generation before me would be happy to kind of invest in buying into an accounting firm or whatever. But a change in attitudes mean that millennial generation may actually be less inclined to say, well, actually, I've got a choice here. I can put 100 grand into an accounting firm that I think is too traditional and doesn't really work in the way I want to, or I could use it on a deposit for a house, or whatever the argument is. So is there the same desire and drive for that generation to want to invest in traditional business models, which creates succession challenges? And then if you want to sell your firm because you've got nobody that wants to buy in internally, you're going to the outside market. And the value of your firm is going to be driven by a number of factors, one of which is going to be how digital ready are you for the future? And that, alongside profitability and everything else, is going to have a big impact.
Yeah. And you talk about the M&A, the mergers and acquisitions, the consolidation. What are you seeing happening in the accounting market right now in that respect?
We are seeing kind of really interesting moves from the money men and women, so the private equity firms, the VC firms, and I've certainly had a fairly long held belief now certainly for the last 5 years or so. We're seeing so much institutional private equity money coming into the tech that supports so much of what we do as a profession, that my view is at some point the VCs and the private equity houses are going to look at this and say, well, we own the technology. How do we own a slice of the service delivery that sits above the technology solutions that we already own? So I think there's going to be a move of more money coming into taking stakes in the service delivery component, and it's certainly driven some of my strategy for my firm for a while now in terms of how do we build those revenue numbers. And now I'm a bit more savvy and aware of the way these organizations work, the profitability and the quality of the earnings that we have that will make us stand head and shoulders above everybody else when they say, actually, you know what, we're going to pay decent multiples for well-run, digitally enabled, forward-thinking accounting firms, so that we then get the opportunity to kind of reap the rewards of our efforts.
And as well as running a firm now, you have become something of an expert on practice growth. And when you're talking to accountants about that, what are the warning signs or the pain points or the signals that would warrant them to say, let's get Will Farnell in here?
I think when it comes to firm growth, I've always said it's really easy to grow an accounting firm.
Right.
What's much harder is scaling an accounting firm.
Okay.
And it almost comes back to kind of the M&A conversation to a point in terms of how do we create something that's scalable? Because so often in accounting firms, the principals are too involved in the client relationships, and we see accounting firms run as accounting practices rather than accounting businesses. And if you want to scale, you've got to be able to step away from that delivery and think about the way that you spend your time, where you focus your effort, and thinking about how do we scale? How do I let go? I mean, some of the challenges I wrote about in my book was how do you start to step away? How do you remove yourself from the business so that the value is in the business and not in you as the individual? So challenges with deploying technology, challenges with team structure are the things that generally get firms coming to talk to me. They think they want help with technology, and because I wrote a book about being a digital firm, so much of it the conversation starts with, yeah, I'm kind of using these tools, but I'm not really doing it effectively. I want help with that. But almost without fail, where we end up focusing when I start working with firms is vision and values is always number one. So many firms don't have that understanding of the why they're doing what they're doing, what is it that makes them different from everybody else, and then how do we build a structure that enables us to deliver on our why. And the technology bit's kind of then the secondary bit. So once you've got the why and you've got the structure, you can then start to think about the other components. I have what I call a digital firm wheel. And within that, we look at things like pricing and process and technology and culture and marketing and services. And these are the things that you can think about once you've really pinned down on that vision and values piece that so many firms struggle with, because it's kind of alien to accountants to think about vision and values and things, because they're analytical people, quite rightly.
But they do focus on growth. So are there different ways to define growth of an accounting firm?
Yeah, because I think it comes down to individual objectives. It's about
Right.
what do you want as the person that owns the business. I mean, growth, it's easy to think about growth and think, oh, well, it's got to be about revenue and profitability and the amount of money in the bank account. But for some people, it's not. So the first point is understanding what is it you're trying to achieve. For some, that I've worked with firm owners that have said, I want to work 3 days a week. I want to build a firm that's so unreliant on me as the individual that I can spend 3 days a week in the firm, and I can spend 4 days with my family, with kids, whatever it is. That needs growth. But it needs growth in a different way to a firm that says, actually, you know what, I want to earn £1 million a year. because then the focus on, well, you're probably gonna have to work quite hard to do that. I know there's people out there that say, hey, earn £1 million and work 4 hours a day. I'm not an advocate of that approach, and it's about doing what you need to do to deliver the results that you want to achieve. For me, it's revenue has been a big part of my growth drivers. Because of what I see happening with the PE market and everything else, if we can grow revenue and maintain profitability, then that puts us in a really great place to be able to continue to grow and acquire and all of those kind of things.
Yeah. You're very passionate about the client experience, Will. You talk about it a lot. What for you defines a good client experience?
I think we have to think about what we mean by client experience. And for me, it's always been about how do we make a client feel, and that's quite a difficult thing again for people to get their head around. So,
well, that's emotions, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And in the early days of my firm, we were doing things that nobody else was, in terms of the way we worked with clients and so on. And we'd get clients kind of posts on Twitter as they left our office. Just had a meeting with the accountant. Never knew it could be so much fun meeting with your accountant.
Okay.
And that demonstrates to me that we've had an emotional connection with that client. So I spend so much of my time trying to get my team to think about putting themselves in the shoes of the client. So as I said right at the beginning, when I set up Farnell Clarke, I put myself in the shoes of the client and said, I'm buying accountancy services. What do I want? So much of the things that I'm trying to get my team to think about is, you're about to send that email. Firstly, put yourself in the shoes of the client. Is the email the right mechanism? Is the wording in the email the right wording?
Yeah.
Should you be picking the phone up? You're on the receiving end. How does it make you feel? And I think if we think about client relationships in that way, then we start to make progress with client experience. And the other way that I look at it and talk to firms is that client experience is a sum total of every touch point you have with a client, from the point you take them on to the point that they leave. So how do we increase that sum total? Well, the obvious one is have more touch points. So what can we build into our processes and the way we engage with clients to increase the frequency of touch points? Because more frequency of touch points means that we're going to get most of those touch points right. Yeah. So therefore, the sum total experience gets better.
How does technology play a part in the client experience?
For us, the first point is about increasing that touch point. So the technology enables us to do things like daily bookkeeping with clients. So it means we've got 600 or so business clients. We do bookkeeping for 60% of them. So that means that 60% of those 600 are getting a client touch point once a week from the team. It might be chasing missing information, but it's a touch point nonetheless. Even my first employee in my firm was somebody to do payroll. And it was at a time when accountants could file annual payrolls for directors. A lot of our payrolls were director-only payrolls then. But I recruited somebody to send a pay slip to every client every month because it created a touch point.
Yeah.
And Vicky, who was in the team at the time, would send a pay slip, and the client would come back and say, hey, Vicky, thanks for the pay slip. Oh, and by the way,
yeah,
can you help with this?
Starts a conversation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So looking at how technology can, and that isn't a prime example of technology, but we didn't have the technology tools back then that we have now. So it's about how do we deploy technology with the right people, with the right process, to enable us to have better quality conversations with clients and make them feel great about working with us as a firm.
Yeah. Where do you stand on the compliance advisory debate, Will?
It's really interesting. So firstly, I think that what advisory isn't is a piece of software. So right. We have to kind of dispel those myths. So many of the software vendors have created the rhetoric around advisory to help them sell product.
Are you calling out software vendors, Phil? You go for it.
I love software vendors.
They do have an agenda, though, don't they?
Hat on. We work very closely with software vendors, and I think that the point that I'm making there is that the technology will play a role in helping us deliver those advisory services, but it's the compliance that drives that. So our biggest growth area in our firm right now is outsourced finance function. That's compliance. It's not advisory. We're doing more bookkeeping. We're doing more credit control, which perhaps is creeping into kind of advisory because it's not really compliance. But it's making sure that we have the right quality of data that enables us to use technology tools to add greater value to our clients. So I think that all advisory should start with good compliance. We should be looking and having conversations with clients, getting to understand what keeps them awake at night. But this is where it all comes together, because if we go back to my arguments about client experience, it's about increasing the number of interactions. The more interactions we have, the more we get to understand our clients, the more we're better placed to deliver those advisory services that will make a difference to the lives of the clients we serve.
Yeah, that does make good sense. And to what degree do you fear for the accounting profession if they don't make some of the changes that you're talking about? What's coming up for the next few years for this business?
I think from a UK perspective, what we have to be really conscious of is that there are about 5.9 million small businesses in the UK.
Yeah.
About 1.2 million of them are VAT registered, which means there's a significant number that are not VAT registered, that are generally sole traders, partnerships, very small micro limited companies. We have tech platforms that are getting closer to the client. We have tech platforms that are blending banking and bookkeeping. So that I worry for those firms that are incredibly reliant on small sole trader type clients, because when we overlay that with generational shifts, digital natives, tech savvy, happy to use a banking app on their mobile phone, how relevant is the role of the accountant to those people? And looking at those numbers, if there's only 1.2 million of the 5.9 that are VAT registered, means that there's only 1.2 million businesses broadly that are turning over more than 85 grand a year. And there's a lot of accounting firms that are all vying for that work. So I think there's going to be a case of firms moving up the value chain, which means there's perhaps going to be a squeeze somewhere in the middle. And it means that we have to look at ways to remain relevant and be more relevant than we are right now. Yeah. And that drives the need for businesses to look at their accounting businesses, to look at their model, how they work, who they work with, what they deliver, how they price, how they value what they do.
This has been brilliant, Will. If people want to have a conversation with you about the great things that you do, what's a good way for them to reach you?
Certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. My own website is willfarnell.com. Feel free to take a look at what we're doing as a firm at Farnell Clarke. And if you're into your tech, appadvisoryplus.com is a great place for you to get some insight, knowledge, and useful resources.
Great. And as a final word, Will, what would you say to the accounting leaders listening that know they need to be moving into the digital world? Maybe they're dragging people behind them, trying to get the culture right, trying to increase the value of the firm. Put into a few words your call to action for them.
Wow, there's a lot of things there. And when I take people through my digital firm wheel, I conclude the presentation as normally by saying, I get it. There's a lot to do there. And how do we do it? And it's like, how do you eat an elephant in small manageable chunks? So we have to be really clear. I would always say, start with the why, start with the vision, focus on clients, and everything else will follow. So in my digital firm wheel, client experience is the hub of the wheel. If we look after our clients and we have clarity over what it is we're trying to do, the rest will come, but we have to be clear on where we want to be as a business.
Will Farnell, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time and your insights today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Rob.
You've been watching or listening to the Accounting Influencers podcast featuring hosts Rob Brown and Martin Bissett with key interviews, what's working in the accounting profession, and news from the accounting and fintech world that helps you do your jobs better. We go out to 144 countries, over 20,000 unique listeners. with 100,000 downloads, and it is accredited for continued professional education and development. Thank you for tuning in.